They laughed at him before he even reached the bar. In Dry Creek, a man who walked alone and spoke less was either a coward or a fool, and the town had decided which one Nathaniel Crow must be. The batwing doors of the saloon swung behind him with a tired creak, letting in a blade of late afternoon sunlight that cut across the smoke-filled room and caught the dust floating in the air. He moved without hurry, boots scraping softly over warped floorboards, coat faded from too many miles under a western sun, hat brim low enough to shadow his eyes. Outside, the wind pushed tumbleweeds across Main Street, and somewhere a loose shutter tapped against brick like a nervous heartbeat. Wade Callahan was already watching him. Everyone knew Wade. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He leaned back in his chair, boots propped on a table that didn't belong to him, silver spurs glinting in the amber light. "Well, I'll be," Wade said loud enough for the whole room. Dry Creek finally gets itself a preacher. Laughter rippled through the saloon, thin and eager. Nathaniel didn't answer. He set $2 on the counter, the coins landing with a quiet, steady sound, and asked for water instead of whiskey. That earned him another round of chuckles. "Water," Wade echoed. "You afraid of something stronger?" The bartender hesitated, eyes flicking between the drifter and the men clustered near Wade. In this town, hesitation could cost you business. Nathaniel took the tin cup when it was offered and drank slowly, like a man who had learned patience the hard way. Up close, a sliver of turquoise showed at his collar, just a hint of blue against worn cotton, but it was enough. Wade noticed. He always noticed what didn't fit. In one lazy motion, he stood, crossed the few steps between them, and flicked the necklace free with 2 fingers. The stone swung in the air before settling against Nathaniel's chest. "Pretty thing," Wade said. "Didn't know drifters wore jewelry." The room quieted a shade. Not silent, but thinner somehow. Nathaniel's eyes lifted then, calm and unreadable, like water in a deep canyon pool. "It's not jewelry," he said softly. "It's a promise." Wade smirked. "To who?" A chair scraped as someone shifted. Outside, a horse snorted and stamped against hard-packed dirt. Nathaniel set the cup down. "To myself," he answered. The words were simple, but they carried weight, like something shaped long before this town ever learned his name. Wade gave a short laugh and glanced around for approval. "You hear that? He's got promises." He reached again for the turquoise, this time tugging just hard enough to test him. And in that small, ordinary moment, under a ceiling stained with years of smoke, Dry Creek made a mistake it would not understand until sundown. Wade held the turquoise between 2 fingers as if it were something he had found in the dirt, turning it toward the light so the blue caught the smoky glow of the lanterns. The stone did not shine the way polished silver did. It absorbed light instead, deep and steady, like a piece of sky cut loose from the horizon. Nathaniel did not reach for it. He did not step back either. He simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, eyes level, as if the noise in the room had drifted miles away. Wade leaned closer, close enough that the scent of tobacco and cheap cologne mixed in the air between them. "You do not look like a man who makes promises," Wade said quietly, though his voice still carried. "You look like a man who runs from them." A few men at the table laughed again, softer this time, testing the mood. Nathaniel's gaze moved past Wade for just a second, toward the far end of the bar where a young woman stood frozen with a tray in her hands. Mary Lou Bennett had been working in that saloon since she was 16, and she had learned how to lower her eyes when trouble brewed. But she was not lowering them now. She was watching the drifter with something close to concern. Nathaniel noticed. He noticed everything. "Running takes more energy than standing still," he said at last. His voice was low, steady, not challenging, just true. Wade's smile thinned. "You think you were standing still?" he asked. He gave the necklace another short tug, not enough to cause harm, just enough to show ownership of the moment. The cord tightened briefly against Nathaniel's collar before settling again. Still no reaction. The room had grown quiet in a different way now. Not entertained. Not comfortable. The piano player had stopped without realizing it. Outside, a gust of wind pushed dust against the windows in a dry whisper. Sheriff Tom Hale stood near the door, hat in his hands, watching and doing nothing. He had the look of a man who had chosen peace over courage too many times. Wade turned slightly, addressing the room while still holding the stone. "You see this?" he said. A man walks into our town wearing something that does not belong to him, talking about promises, acting like he answers to no one. He glanced back at Nathaniel. Dry Creek has rules. Nathaniel nodded once. Every town does. And who enforces them? Wade asked. He released the necklace and let it fall back against Nathaniel's chest. The turquoise rested there, quiet as before. Nathaniel's hand came up then, not in anger, not in threat, just to settle the stone back beneath his shirt. His fingers lingered there for half a second, as if feeling for something steady inside himself. Men who remember what they are for, he replied. It was a simple sentence, but it landed heavier than any shout. Wade's jaw tightened. He stepped back, measuring him now, reassessing. The laughter did not return. Not this time. And in the space between them, something invisible shifted, like a line drawn in dust that only one of them could see. Wade did not like silence when he was not the one controlling it. He shifted his weight, boots thudding once against the warped floor, and gave a short nod to one of his men near the poker table. The man understood the signal and stood, knocking his chair back with a scrape that cut through the stillness. Maybe our friend needs to show a little respect, the man said, stepping closer, voice louder than necessary. Sheriff Hale took one hesitant step forward, then stopped. His fingers tightened around his hat brim, knuckles pale, but he did not speak. He never did when it mattered. Nathaniel noticed that too. He turned slightly, enough to place himself between Wade and the rest of the room without making a display of it. It was not a challenge. It was positioning. I paid for my water, he said evenly. I will be on my way. Wade let out a soft breath through his nose. You do not leave when I am talking, he replied. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. They carried the weight of habit, of a man used to deciding when conversations ended. Nathaniel's gaze drifted past him again, this time to the window. The sun had dipped lower, stretching long shadows across Main Street. The town always felt smaller at that hour, like it was holding its breath before dark. Talking is not the same as saying something, Nathaniel answered. A few heads turned at that. The man near the poker table reached out as if to grab Nathaniel's shoulder, but stopped when Nathaniel's hand moved an inch toward his side. Not to draw, not even close, just enough to remind everyone in the room that the motion existed. The air tightened. The man withdrew his hand slowly, clearing his throat as if the gesture had never been meant. Wade's eyes narrowed. He was measuring timing now, watching for tremors, for fear, for any crack in the calm surface. He found none. Nathaniel did not blink more than necessary. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood as if the ground beneath his boots belonged to him as much as it belonged to anyone else. Mary Lou shifted behind the bar, setting the tray down with deliberate care so it would not clatter. Her eyes flicked to the sheriff again, silently asking him to do something. Sheriff Hale swallowed, then looked away. Outside, a wagon rolled past at a slow pace, its wooden wheels creaking over hard dirt. Life continuing, as if this moment were not balanced on a thin edge. Wade stepped closer again, stopping within arm's length. You think you are better than this town? He asked. Nathaniel shook his head once. No, he said. I think this town can be better than this. The words were not loud, but they reached every corner of the saloon. Even the lantern flames seemed to steady. Wade's jaw tightened. He was not used to men who did not rise to his tone. He was not used to restraint. And somewhere beneath the smoke and dust and fading light, a realization began to settle over the room like the first cool breath before nightfall. The quiet drifter was not afraid, and that frightened them more than any raised voice ever could. The tension did not break. It thickened. Wade let out a slow breath and took one step back, not in surrender, but in calculation. He looked around the saloon as if searching for someone to confirm that he still owned the air in the room. His men shifted their weight, boots scraping softly, hands hovering near their belts without quite settling there. No one wanted to move first. Outside, the last light of day stretched across Main Street, turning the dust gold and the storefront windows into mirrors of fading fire. Nathaniel remained where he was, shoulders loose, chin level, as if he had all the time in the world. That was what unsettled them most. He was not performing courage. He was not trying to prove anything. He simply stood. Wade tilted his head slightly. You talk like a man who believes he has choices, he said. Around here, choices belong to me. Nathaniel's eyes flicked briefly to the door, then back to Wade. That is the difference between power and control, he replied. Power belongs to the one who earns it. Control belongs to the one who fears losing it. The words landed quietly, but they carried further than any shout could have. A man near the window let out a nervous cough. Mary Lou's fingers tightened around the edge of the bar. Sheriff Hale shifted again, the leather of his boots creaking against the floor, yet he remained rooted where he stood. Wade's smile returned, but it was thinner now. You think you know me? He asked. Nathaniel shook his head once. No, he said. I think you know yourself. Silence followed. Long enough for the ticking of the wall clock to become audible. Long enough for the wind outside to rattle the sign above the door. Wade stepped closer again, lowering his voice so that only those nearest could hear. Men who walk into towns alone usually do not last long, he said. Men who walk alone learn to travel light, Nathaniel answered. He did not raise his hands. He did not threaten. He simply let the truth settle between them. Wade glanced down at the turquoise resting against Nathaniel's chest, then back into his eyes. For the first time since the drifter had entered the saloon, doubt flickered there. Not fear. Not yet. But doubt. He had expected anger. He had expected a plea. He had expected something loud and reckless that he could push against. Instead, he found stillness. And stillness was harder to break. A wagon rolled past outside, wheels crunching over gravel. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and then fell quiet. The sun dipped another inch, shadows lengthening across the wooden floorboards. Wade straightened, clearing his throat as if to reclaim the moment. You can finish your water, he said finally. Then you will leave Dry Creek. And you will not come back. It was not shouted. It was delivered like a verdict. Nathaniel studied him for a heartbeat longer, then glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the men who had laughed earlier. One by one, they looked away. I will leave when I am done, he said calmly. And I will return if I choose. It was not defiance. It was fact. And in that simple declaration, something shifted again in the room. Not loud, not visible, but real. The kind of shift that comes before a storm, when the air changes, and even those who do not understand why begin to feel it in their bones. For a moment, it seemed as though the matter might end there. Wade had spoken. The drifter had answered. And the fragile balance of Dry Creek hung between them like dust caught in a beam of dying sunlight. Nathaniel reached for the tin cup once more, lifting it with steady fingers, finishing the last swallow of water as if the entire room were not waiting on his next breath. The sound of the cup touching wood was small, almost gentle, but it echoed. Wade watched him closely, expecting some final word, some flare of pride that he could seize upon. It did not come. Instead, Nathaniel placed 2 more silver coins beside the first. For the trouble, he said quietly, though no trouble had yet been named. The bartender stared at the coins as if they weighed more than metal. Outside, a sudden shout broke the air. Not angry. Not yet. Just sharp enough to turn heads. Mary Lou moved toward the window, her hand hovering near the curtain before she pulled it aside an inch. It is the Bennett wagon, she said, her voice tight. They are blocking it. Wade did not look surprised. He glanced toward the door with mild curiosity, as if the interruption were scheduled. Nathaniel did not rush. He stepped toward the entrance with the same measured pace he had used all afternoon. Sheriff Hale finally found his voice. Now hold on. He began weakly, but no one listened. The batwing doors creaked again as Nathaniel pushed them open. The evening air met him with the scent of dry earth and distant mesquite smoke. Main Street had drawn a small crowd. The Bennett wagon stood crooked near the center, one wheel pressed into a rut. A pair of Wade's men leaned casually against the wooden frame, speaking to Mr. Bennett with smiles that did not reach their eyes. Mr. Bennett was a thin man with sunburned cheeks and hands worn from years behind reins. He stood beside his horse, hat clutched to his chest. It is a toll, one of the men was saying. New rule. We have already paid the freight tax, Mr. Bennett replied carefully. Then consider this a welcome fee, the other answered. No one touched him. No one raised a hand. But the message was clear. Pay twice, or learn what refusal costs. Nathaniel stepped off the boardwalk and onto the dirt. His boots left shallow impressions in the powdery ground. The crowd shifted as he passed, parting not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. Wade followed more slowly, hands resting near his belt, expression unreadable. You are not leaving after all, Wade called lightly. Nathaniel stopped a few feet from the wagon. He looked at the wheel lodged in the rut, then at Mr. Bennet's trembling hands. He crouched without asking and examined the ground, brushing dust aside with calm precision. "It will roll free if you ease the horse back 3 inches, he said evenly. Mr. Bennet blinked, confused, but nodded. Nathaniel stood and placed his shoulder against the wooden sideboard, not straining, just steady. "Now," he said. The horse stepped back. The wheel lifted clean from the rut and settled onto level ground. Simple, quiet, effective, the crowd murmured. Wade's men straightened, their easy smiles fading. Nathaniel dusted his hands and stepped away. "There is no toll on kindness," he said, not looking at Wade. "Only on fear." The words drifted across the street, carried by the first cool breath of evening. And for the first time since he had entered Dry Creek, the balance began to tilt. The street did not erupt. It tightened. Wade's men stepped away from the wagon slowly, brushing invisible dust from their sleeves as if nothing unusual had happened. Mr. Bennet climbed onto his seat with unsteady hands, nodding once in silent gratitude before guiding the horse forward. The wagon rolled cleanly down Main Street, wheels humming over packed earth, and for a few seconds the only sound was that soft wooden rhythm fading into the distance. Nathaniel remained where he stood, eyes following the wagon until it turned the corner. He did not look at Wade. He did not need to. The shift in the air was enough. Wade descended from the boardwalk one measured step at a time, boots sinking slightly into the loose dirt. "You enjoy meddling in town business?" he asked lightly, though the edge beneath his tone had sharpened. Nathaniel brushed the last of the dust from his palms. "I enjoy simple solutions," he replied. "Most problems are smaller than the men who pretend to own them." A murmur traveled through the onlookers, quick and nervous. No one laughed now. Mary Lou stood near the saloon doors, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. Sheriff Hale lingered by the jailhouse steps, watching as though he were witnessing something he had avoided for years. Wade stopped 3 feet from Nathaniel, close enough to test space again. "You think lifting a wagon wheel makes you a hero?" he asked. Nathaniel's expression did not change. "No," he said. "It makes me useful." The word hung there. Useful. Not brave. Not defiant. Wade glanced at the townsfolk gathered along the wooden walkways. He was calculating the room again, measuring how much of his shadow still covered it. "You are passing through," he said. "You do not understand how things work here." Nathaniel finally met his eyes. "I understand," he answered softly. "Men get used to bending. After a while they forget they can stand." The breeze picked up, lifting a thin spiral of dust between them. A loose sign creaked overhead. One of Wade's men shifted, clearing his throat as if eager to break the tension. But Wade did not give him the signal this time. He studied Nathaniel more carefully now, not as an annoyance, but as a variable he had failed to account for. "You talk about standing," Wade said, "but you walk alone." Nathaniel gave the faintest nod. "That is how you learn balance." Silence followed again, deeper than before. The kind of silence that does not belong to fear, but to thought. "Hey." Few townsfolk straightened their shoulders without realizing it. A man who had kept his hat low all afternoon lifted his chin by an inch. Small movements. Almost invisible. Wade noticed those too. His jaw tightened. "Dry Creek does not need lessons," he said. Nathaniel glanced down the length of the street, past the general store, past the stable, toward the wide horizon where the sky was turning amber and violet. "Every town does," he replied. The sun dipped lower, and with it the last easy certainty Wade had carried all day. Nothing dramatic had happened. No raised voices. No sudden chaos. And yet the ground beneath Dry Creek felt different now, as if something long buried had shifted just enough to be felt. Nathaniel adjusted the turquoise beneath his collar and stepped back toward the boardwalk, unhurried, leaving Wade standing in the fading light, staring at a man who did not bend. Night did not fall all at once in Dry Creek. It settled slow, like dust after a long ride. Lanterns flickered to life along the boardwalk, their glow soft and uncertain against the deepening blue of the sky. Nathaniel remained near the saloon steps, hat brim low, posture easy, as though he were simply another traveler waiting for supper. But no one mistook him for ordinary now. Conversations resumed in fragments, low and careful. A blacksmith wiped his hands on a rag and stood a little straighter. A shopkeeper who had avoided Wade's gaze for months found himself looking up instead of down. Small things, almost invisible, Wade felt every one of them. He climbed back onto the boardwalk, boots striking wood with deliberate force, as if sound alone could restore order. "Enjoy the show?" he asked the townsfolk, voice light but edged. No one answered. The silence was no longer fear. It was consideration. Wade turned toward Nathaniel again. "You made your point," he said. "Now make your exit." Nathaniel glanced up at the first star appearing over the horizon. "I told you," he replied evenly. "I leave when I am done." Wade's jaw tightened. "And when will that be?" Nathaniel met his eyes, calm as ever. "When the air feels lighter." A faint breeze moved down the street, carrying the scent of cooling earth. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Mary Lou stepped off the boardwalk then, crossing a few cautious feet toward Nathaniel. "You should not stay," she said quietly. "He does not like being challenged." Nathaniel looked at her, not with bravado, not with recklessness, but with a steady kindness that made her swallow. "I did not challenge him," he said. "I reminded him." Wade heard that. Of course he did. He descended again, stopping between Nathaniel and the center of town, as though placing himself back at the axis of everything. "Reminded me of what?" he asked. Nathaniel did not hesitate. "That control is loud," he answered softly. "Strength is not." The words carried farther than any threat could have. Sheriff Hale stepped forward then, just one pace. As if testing ground, he had forgotten how to walk on. "Wade," he began, voice uncertain but present. "Perhaps it is time to call it a night." Wade looked at him, and for a moment the old balance flickered, the habit of command nearly reclaiming the room. But it did not settle the same way. Too many eyes were open now. Too many backs had straightened. Wade studied Nathaniel one last time, searching for some crack in the composure, some sign that this calm was an act. He found none. Only stillness. Only a man who did not flinch. "This is not over," Wade said at last. It was not a threat. It was a promise to himself. Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. "Nothing ever is," he replied. The lantern light caught the edge of the turquoise at his collar for just a second before he adjusted it beneath his shirt. And as night finally claimed the street, something unspoken moved through Dry Creek. Not a cheer, not a celebration, just a quiet awareness that the ground beneath them had shifted, and that the man who walked alone was no longer walking unnoticed. The night deepened, and with it came the kind of quiet that does not belong to peace but to waiting. Dry Creek had always been loud after sundown. Boots on planks, laughter spilling from the saloon, the clink of glasses, and the scrape of chairs. Tonight the sounds were thinner, stretched tight across something unseen. Nathaniel stood near the hitching post where a few tired horses shifted their weight, leather creaking softly. He rested one hand along the worn wood rail, feeling the grooves carved by years of rains and restless animals. He looked like a man with nowhere urgent to be, but his eyes moved slowly, measuring windows, doorways, the rhythm of shadows beneath lantern light. Sheriff Hale approached with hesitant steps, clearing his throat before speaking. "You have stirred something," he said, voice low enough not to carry. Nathaniel did not turn right away. "It was already there," he replied. "I only brushed the dust aside." The sheriff studied him for a moment, then looked down the street where Wade and his men lingered near the general store, speaking in close circles. "He does not forget," Hale warned. Nathaniel nodded once. "Neither do I." The answer was simple, but it held years behind it. A breeze drifted through town, cooler now, bringing the faint scent of distant rain even though the sky above remained clear. Mary Lou stepped out of the saloon again, this time carrying a small lantern. She set it on the edge of the boardwalk, its glow steady and warm. "Some of the men are talking," she said softly. "Not laughing. Talking." Nathaniel gave the faintest smile. "That is how it begins," he said. Across the street, Wade broke from his circle and began walking toward them, slow and deliberate, boots striking the dirt with measured intent. The few remaining townsfolk who had lingered drew back instinctively, forming a loose corridor between the two men. No one spoke. Wade stopped 10 feet away, just beyond the reach of lantern light, where his features blurred slightly in shadow. "You planning to stay the night?" he asked. Nathaniel looked past him toward the dark stretch of road leading out of town, then back at the lit windows along Main Street. "I have not decided," he answered. Wade's gaze sharpened. Men who hesitate often regret it. Nathaniel's expression did not change. Men who rush often do. The wind shifted again, lifting a curl of dust between them. For a long moment neither moved. The silence stretched, not fragile now, but heavy with choice. Wade's eyes dropped briefly to the turquoise at Nathaniel's collar, catching the faint lantern glow before rising again. Something unspoken passed there, something older than Dry Creek, older than any rule Wade had made for himself. "You think you are the only one who has walked alone?" Wade asked quietly. Nathaniel considered him, truly considered him, and for the first time there was no edge in his voice. "No," he said. "I think you forgot what." It was like. The words did not accuse. They revealed. Wade's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. Behind him, one of his men shifted uncertainly, as if unsure where to stand. And in that hesitation, small but undeniable, the balance tipped further. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with the quiet recognition that fear was no longer the loudest voice on Main Street. The street held its breath as the lantern flames wavered in the rising night wind. Wade remained in the half-shadow, his outline steady but no longer commanding the same certainty it had an hour ago. Nathaniel stood opposite him, boots planted in the dirt as though the earth itself had chosen his side. No one spoke. Even the horses seemed to sense the weight in the air, shifting quietly against their reins. Sheriff Hale lingered near the jailhouse steps, closer now than before, though he still kept his distance from the center of the street. Mary Lou's lantern cast a soft circle of light that barely reached Nathaniel's boots. Beyond that glow, everything felt suspended. Wade broke the silence first. "You talk about fear like you know it," he said, voice lower than it had been all evening. "You think I built this town by being afraid?" Nathaniel's gaze did not waver. "No," he answered. "I think you built it because you were." The words did not rise above conversation, yet they traveled. A few townsfolk glanced at Wade, not with defiance, but with curiosity. Wade's jaw flexed. "You do not know what it takes to keep order," he said. "Order without trust is only noise," Nathaniel replied. "And noise fades." The breeze carried a faint rustle from the cottonwoods at the edge of town. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once, its echo thin and lonely. Wade took a slow step forward, testing distance again. "You are not from here," he said. "You will leave. And when you do, this town will still answer to me." Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps," he said. "But tonight they are answering to themselves." That was when it happened. Not a shout, not a sudden movement, just a subtle shift among the men along the boardwalk. One by one, they straightened. A ranch hand who had paid every toll without complaint crossed his arms instead of lowering them. The blacksmith stepped down from his doorway, not to fight, but to stand where he could be seen. Even Sheriff Hale moved another pace closer, no longer hiding behind the jailhouse rail. Wade saw it. He saw the space widening around him, not from fear, but from awareness. His men felt it too. One of them glanced at the others as if asking for direction that did not come. Nathaniel did not advance. He did not press the advantage. He simply remained still, letting the town decide what to do with the silence. "You think they will follow you?" Wade asked quietly. Nathaniel shook his head. "No," he said. "I think they will remember themselves." The lantern light flickered across Wade's face, revealing something that had not been there before. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. He looked around at the faces he had commanded for so long, searching for the old reflex, the quick nod, the lowered eyes. He found hesitation instead, and in that hesitation, something loosened. Wade exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost to the wind. "This changes nothing," he said, though the words lacked conviction. Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "It already has." The night settled fully then, deep and vast above Dry Creek. No one cheered. No one celebrated. But the air felt different. Lighter. As if the town had taken its first unsteady breath without asking permission. Wade did not move for several long seconds. The lantern light trembled across his face, catching the sharp edge of his cheekbone and the tight set of his jaw. Around him, the town no longer leaned in his direction. It stood. Not boldly. Not loudly. But upright. Nathaniel felt it without turning his head. The shift was subtle, like the moment before a horse decides to trust your hand instead of the reins. Wade finally took a step back, boots grinding softly in the dirt. It was a small movement, almost invisible, yet everyone saw it. "You think silence makes you strong," he said, voice quieter now. "It makes you alone." Nathaniel answered without hesitation. A man can be alone and still be right. The words did not challenge. They settled. Sheriff Hale cleared his throat and stepped fully into the open space between them. The badge on his chest caught the lantern glow for the first time that night. "That is enough," he said, not loudly but firmly. It was the first time. His voice had carried Wade in years. Wade glanced at him, surprised, as if noticing him for the first time. "You planning to enforce something, Sheriff?" Wade asked. Hale swallowed, then squared his shoulders. "I am planning to remember my job." The statement hung in the air. A murmur passed through the crowd, not of excitement, but of recognition. Wade's men shifted uneasily. Without the certainty of command, they looked smaller somehow, like men waiting for instructions that no longer came. Nathaniel remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, turquoise hidden once more beneath his collar. He had not drawn attention to himself. He had not claimed leadership. He had only stood long enough for others to remember how. Wade exhaled slowly, eyes sweeping across the faces of Dry Creek. He searched for the old reflex again. It did not return. "You all think this is a victory," he said, almost to himself. "It is only the beginning." Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. "It always is." The wind moved down the street again, cooler now, lifting the edges of coats and stirring dust along the boardwalk. A door opened somewhere behind the general store. A child's laugh drifted faintly from an upstairs window, unaware of the weight below. Life continuing. Wade stepped backward once more, creating distance without announcing retreat. "Enjoy your lighter air," he said, the faintest edge of bitterness in his tone. "It does not stay that way." Nathaniel watched him carefully, not as an enemy, but as a man at a crossroads. "That depends on the men who breathe it," he replied. Wade turned then, signaling to his men with nothing more than a glance. They followed, boots striking dirt with less certainty than before. The corridor of townsfolk did not part in fear this time. It simply remained steady as Wade passed through. When he reached the edge of lantern light, he paused for half a second, as though considering something he could not name. Then he continued into the darkness. Silence lingered after he disappeared from view. Not heavy, not fragile, just open. Sheriff Hale looked at Nathaniel, something like gratitude in his eyes. "You staying?" he asked quietly. Nathaniel gazed down the long stretch of road beyond town, then back at the lit windows along Main Street. "For tonight," he said. And for the first time in years, Dry Creek did not feel owned. It felt awake. The town did not return to normal after Wade disappeared into the dark. It shifted into something quieter, more deliberate. Lanterns burned lower. Conversation stayed close to the chest, and for the first time in years, men spoke without glancing over their shoulders. Nathaniel remained near the hitching post, hat tilted back slightly now, eyes tracing the outline of the rooftops against the starlit sky. Sheriff Hale approached again, this time without hesitation. "He will not let this go," the sheriff said. Nathaniel nodded once. "No," he replied. "Men who build on fear rarely surrender it." Hale studied him for a moment. "You talk like you have seen it before." Nathaniel rested his forearm on the wooden rail, feeling the worn grain beneath his sleeve. "I have," he said simply. A pause followed, long enough for a distant train whistle to echo faintly across the plains, nearly 2 miles out. The sound reminded the town that the world was larger than Dry Creek. Mary Lou stepped down from the boardwalk again, her lantern casting a small pool of light between them. "Some of the ranch hands are gathering by the well," she said quietly. "They are not looking for trouble. They are just standing together." Nathaniel allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "That is how men relearn courage," he said. "Not by shouting, by standing." Sheriff Hale drew a slow breath. "You could leave before sunrise," he suggested. "No one would blame you." Nathaniel looked down the long road stretching east, pale under moonlight. "If I leave too soon," he answered, "they might think this strength belongs to me." Hale frowned slightly. "Does it not?" Nathaniel shook his head. "It belongs to them. I only reminded them it was there." The wind picked up again, brushing past in a low sweep that stirred coats and lifted loose dust from the street. Across town, Wade's silhouette appeared briefly at the far end of Main Street, near the livery stable, speaking in low tones to his men. They listened, but their posture was different now, less certain. Nathaniel noticed. He did not comment. "You are not afraid?" Hale asked quietly. Nathaniel considered the question carefully. "Fear is not the enemy," he said. "Forgetting who you are is." The sheriff looked toward the cluster of townsfolk near the well. One of them removed his hat and wiped his brow, then straightened, shoulders set. Another placed a hand on his neighbor's back, steady and silent. Small gestures, real ones. "You speak like a preacher," Hale said after a moment. Nathaniel let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. "No," he replied. "Preachers ask men to believe. I ask them to remember." The moon climbed higher, silver light replacing the last glow of lanterns. Dry Creek felt different beneath it. Not louder, not braver in any grand sense. Just awake. Nathaniel reached up and touched the turquoise beneath his collar briefly, as if confirming something known only to him. Then he stepped away from the hitching post and walked slowly toward the center of town, not to claim it, not to own it, but to stand where every man could see him in the open light. And for the first time in many years, no one looked away. The night stretched wide above Dry Creek, clear and endless, stars scattered like quiet witnesses across the sky. Nathaniel stood in the center of Main Street, not as a figure of command, but as a point of stillness. Around him, the townsfolk did not crowd close, yet they did not retreat either. They remained where they were, shoulders squared, eyes lifted. The well near the center of town became a gathering place without anyone declaring it so. Ranch hands leaned against the stone rim, speaking in low, steady voices. The blacksmith stood with arms folded, no longer watching the shadows for permission to move. Sheriff Hale positioned himself near the jailhouse door, not hiding now, simply present. Wade emerged once more from the far end of the street, his stride measured, his expression harder to read beneath the moonlight. His men followed, but there was distance between them, small gaps that had not existed earlier. He stopped within the pale glow cast by Mary Lou's lantern and looked around at the town he had ruled by habit. "You think standing together changes the world?" he asked, voice calm but tight. No one answered immediately. It was not defiance. It was patience. Nathaniel met his gaze without stepping forward. "It changes a town," he replied quietly. Wade studied the faces around him, searching for doubt. He found concern, uncertainty, even fear. But he did not find obedience. That was new. He drew a slow breath and glanced at Sheriff Hale. "You going to back this?" he asked. Hale straightened, the badge on his chest catching silver light. "I am going to back the law," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that had been absent for years. Wade's eyes flickered back to Nathaniel. "You do not belong here," he said. Nathaniel nodded once. "That is true. Then why stay?" Wade pressed. Nathaniel let the silence linger, letting the wind move through the open space between them. "Because belonging is not the same as caring," he answered. The breeze shifted again, cooler now, brushing coats and stirring loose strands of hair. Somewhere in the distance, another train whistle sounded, faint but steady, a reminder that the rails connected this small town to something larger than its fears. Wade looked down the street toward the stable, then toward the well, then back at Nathaniel. His shoulders eased by an inch, not in surrender, but in recognition of a line he could not cross without losing more than he gained. "You will leave," he said finally. Nathaniel inclined his head. By morning, the answer settled the air. Not as victory, not as defeat, as choice. Wade gave a short nod, almost imperceptible, then turned away. This time, when his men followed, they did so without the same tight formation. The space between them remained. The town watched until the stable doors closed behind them. Silence lingered, but it no longer felt heavy. Nathaniel looked around at the faces illuminated by lantern and moonlight. "It was always yours," he said softly. No one applauded. No one cheered. They simply stood a little straighter. And under the wide western sky, Dry Creek felt less like a place owned, and more like a place remembered. Dawn arrived without ceremony. The sky over Dry Creek shifted from deep indigo to a thin wash of pale gold, and the first light slipped between rooftops and settled gently across Main Street. The town looked smaller in morning light. Honest. The dust lay quiet, undisturbed, as if the night had decided not to argue with the day. Nathaniel stood near the hitching post where he had kept watch for hours, hat in his hands now, turquoise catching the faint glow of sunrise. He had not slept. He had not needed to. Some lessons were better learned in the open air. Sheriff Hale stepped out of the jailhouse. Coat draped over one arm, eyes clearer than they had been the day before. "He is gone," Hale said quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. For now, he replied. Hale looked down the road stretching west, then back at the cluster of storefronts slowly coming to life. Men do not change overnight, he said. No, Nathaniel agreed. But they can remember overnight. The blacksmith opened his shop door and swept the walkway with steady strokes. A ranch hand led his horse to water without glancing toward the stable for permission. Mary Lou pushed open the saloon doors, letting fresh morning air wash through the room where fear had once lingered. Small movements, simple acts, but they belonged to the town now. Nathaniel placed his hat back on his head and tightened the strap on his saddle. Sheriff Hale watched him carefully. You could stay, he offered. Nathaniel shook his head gently. If I stay, he said, they might look to me again. Hale studied him, then gave a slow nod. And that would be easier, he said. Yes, Nathaniel answered. And easier is how men forget. The sun rose another inch, warming the wood of the boardwalk and turning the windows bright. Nathaniel mounted his horse in one smooth motion and settled into the saddle like a man who had ridden more miles than he could count. He paused for a moment, looking down Main Street one last time. No grand farewell, no speech, just a quiet gaze that carried weight. Mary Lou lifted her hand in a small wave. The blacksmith tipped his hat. Sheriff Hale stood straighter than he had in years. Nathaniel inclined his head once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than ownership. Remember, he said softly, not to one man, but to all of them. Then he turned his horse toward the open road. Hoofbeats sounded steady against the packed earth as he rode east, sunlight catching the edge of the turquoise at his collar before it disappeared beneath his shirt. Dry Creek watched until the dust settled and the horizon swallowed him whole. No one spoke for a long moment. They did not need to. The street felt different now. Not louder, not braver in some dramatic way, just lighter. Sheriff Hale finally turned toward the jailhouse, adjusting his badge with quiet resolve. The ranch hands returned to work. The blacksmith struck his hammer against iron, the ring clear and certain in the morning air. And somewhere far down the road, a lone rider moved steadily toward the next horizon, leaving behind no legend carved in stone, only a town that had learned to stand without asking permission.